I'm gonna get started. It's a little bit after 11 here on the West Coast. I am gonna record this and post it on the YouTube channel. Hopefully it's worth it. I'm sure a few more people will be trickling in. Thanks for joining. My name is Eric Berman. I am the owner and primary developer of my flight book, which I'm sure you're familiar with if you're here. And I usually at Oshkosh, excuse me, give a talk about getting started with an electronic logbook where I cover some topics about how to do things in a professional manner. But today I wanted to pre-flight a talk that I'm hoping to give this summer about how to really make your logbook shine and really how to get the most out of it. And so I'm calling this a pre-flight. There'll be time for a Q&A at the end, but I'm really hoping I can get your feedback about topics I should cover, things I should go in more depth, things that didn't work, just how I can make this a better talk. So with that, first thing I need to say, oh, this doesn't work a presenter view, does it? There we go. Okay. Is if you still have your logbook on paper, there's not a lot I can do for you. If you have paper, then what you have is kind of what you have. I would strongly suggest moving to electronic. I obviously am biased and would suggest you move to my flight book in particular. And I have other talks about how to do this. They talk about doing bulk import and starting totals and getting your data transcribed and so forth. And so I'll leave this slide up here for just a moment. If you want to take a picture of it, the QR code will take you to at least one of the other talks that I give. And that's really the other Oshkosh talk that I give. But today I'm going to assume that, yeah, you actually have your data in an electronic logbook, and my flight book in particular, and I'll talk about how to make it really shine from there. So let's move on. So it really breaks down into four categories for me. The first is data hygiene, making sure that you actually have good data in your logbook and that you're following good practices for your logging. Then I'll talk about being able to answer questions and provide reports for insurance companies, clubs, FBOs that you rent from, things like that. Then preparing for check rides. So that's where you're actually dealing with the government and certifying authorities. And finally, job interviews. So applying for the airlines. So first thing is data hygiene. And I think it's really important to say that it doesn't matter how good your logbook looks in terms of its appearance. If the data is not defensible, it's going to look terrible. And you really want to show that you're following good data practices. So and that you have the experience that you claim to have. So let me talk about 10 common mistakes that people make. These are in no particular order whatsoever. They're actually the order they came to mind. So the first one is basic data errors. One that I see is transpose digits. You put in 3.2 hours for a flight and you record 2.3 hours of PIC time. Or you're missing a decimal. You put in 3.2 hours and the PIC time goes in as 32. The nice thing about these two errors is that they're really easy to fix or to avoid, I should say. If you're using the website, which these two screenshots are from, you'll notice the little gray arrows. Those will cross-fill from the total time field or from the approach field or the landing field, whichever is appropriate for the target. And so you won't get those kinds of errors if you do that. And if you use the iOS or the Android app, they have the same functionality, but just because of real estate, they use touch and hold. If you press and hold the target field, it'll do the cross-fill for you. Another mistake people sometimes make is confusing the format. So some people use hours and minutes, and some people use decimal. Hours and minutes, of course, uses a colon, and decimal uses a comma or a period, depending on where in the world you are. 1:25 is 85 minutes. 1.25 is 75 minutes. So it's important to get that right. You want to make sure that you're not cheating yourself out of PIC, SIC, or dual time. If you log a 2-hour flight, you should be logging at least some of the time in the role that you performed. And in that vein, outside of the US, it's actually a requirement that your second in command time plus your pilot in command time plus your dual command time equals your total flight time. You can't double log, and every minute has to be accounted for. This, of course, is not true here in the US. You're allowed to log PIC time if you're rated for the aircraft and if you're manipulating the controls. So for most of us, our instrument rating, for example, you're logging PIC and dual for all of that training because you're manipulating the controls and you're receiving instruction. All right, second category of errors that people make is they will log PIC or SIC time or even total time in a sim. For that matter, you can't really log cross-country time or instrument time in a sim. So at the risk of getting over my skis here, because I'm not a lawyer, I can't give legal advice. This is just my personal interpretation. So use at your own risk. But if you read 61.1, it defines flight time pretty clearly as when an aircraft is moving, either under its own power or for a glider if you are towed. And then if you look then in 61.51, pilot and command time, you can log flight time. And so flight time, the definition kind of excludes a simulator, and PIC time, since it relies on flight time, it kind of excludes a simulator. And the same is true for second in command time. The right way to log this stuff is to put the time of the session into the ground sim field. You can log simulated instrument, that's fine. You can log dual if you're receiving instruction. That's I believe that's okay. But you don't want to be logging these times because they're not technically loggable as far as I am aware. And then that also leads to things like, suppose you have 200 hours and you're a commercially rated multi-engine pilot, and you go and you spend 100 hours in a Boeing 737 full motion sim. You could probably, I think, get your Boeing 737 type certificate without ever setting foot into the airplane, into a physical airplane, but you're still just a 200-hour pilot. And so you can't, you don't want to claim that time. Hold on just a second. Somebody's trying to get into the call. All right, second error people make with sims is 6151 wants you to log the information about the sim, type and identification, where it was, whether it was a full flight simulator, training device, or ATD as appropriate. My flight book actually handles the latter part, whether it's an FTD or ATD or full flight simulator. But you're supposed to log this. And my flight book is actually helpful in that if you pick a sim as your flight entry aircraft, it will automatically show a field called simulator training device identifier for this express purpose. Number 3, if you confuse ATDs, FTDs, and full flight sims, this is much less of an issue than it was several years ago. 6157 for instrument currency used to distinguish these in a crazy way that did absolute violence upon the English language. But about 5 or 6 years ago, they cleaned it up, and now you can mix and match. And as long as it's certified, you can use whatever you want for instrument currency. So now it really kind of only matters for if you want to count your landings for passenger currency, and for if you want to count some of your time towards the training requirements or experience requirements for a rating. My flight book, I really don't care what you call it. I don't care level D, level C, whatever kind of certification. I just want to know, is it an ATD, FTD, or a full flight sim? And do I count it for instrument currency? And do I count it for passenger carrying currency? Do I count the landings? Which you can only do in a full flight sim or some FTDs and under Part 142. Cross-country time is another area that is an absolute mess. I have a whole blog post that's a rant on this. Yeah, cross-country time is really simple, right? And if you look at 61.1, it's just a cross-country flight is just a flight that goes from A to B, and it takes off at A and it lands at B, unless it doesn't have to land. Where B is a certain minimum distance from A, unless it isn't. And where B is a different airport from A, unless it isn't. It turns out, if you read the definition, that you can't actually look at a flight and say, is this flight a cross-country flight? You have to have a context to answer that. Can this flight count as cross-country for purposes of my ATP rating, or for purposes of my private pilot rating, or for purposes of overall cross-country flight experience? If you don't know the question you're trying to answer, you can't answer whether a given flight is cross-country. So here's my suggestion on this, is only bother logging it if it counts towards a rating and meets all the relevant distance requirements. So that's 50 nautical miles for airplanes. It's 25 nautical miles for helicopter. It does have a landing at those distance. You can always find your basic cross-country time, the I flew from A to B time, by searching for non-local flights. So there's no real value in logging it explicitly. If the route of flight has A to B and it has a landing, it's a non-local flight, it's basic cross-country, and you can find it and get those totals. But if you want to, there's a set of properties that you can add to a flight, and I've got 7 of them listed over on the right here, that can decorate that flight and answer distance, or, for example, for the ATP rating, where you have to go 50 nautical miles, but you don't have to do a landing, you can indicate that as well, so that you can find flights that have those criteria and see that time. Night flight is another area where people often make logging mistakes. 6157B, remember, the night landings need to be a full stop. And in fact, in all cases in the FAA world, they have to be night landings don't count for anything unless they're a full stop, except one space that there was one quirk I found, what was it, 2 weeks ago? Somebody pointed out that they actually, I think it was a Part 141 commercial experience requirement or something, where it said you have to have night landings, but it didn't say full stop. But for the most part, you want to do them full stop. They also need to be you also need to have them paired with night takeoffs. You have to have done 3 night takeoffs and night landings to be night current. I've always been lax with this because pilots are really lax about this. So my rule on night currency is that if I don't see any night takeoffs anywhere in your logbook, then I just look for 3 full stop night landings in 90 days. And if I find them, I say, you're current, but you should log the landings because I didn't find any. But if I find even 1 night landing in your logbook, then I know you know how to log them, and so I enforce it. And so I need to see both the night takeoffs and the night landings within the preceding 90 days for you to be night current. To be clear, 6157A also requires takeoffs, but any takeoff counts. It doesn't have to be a night takeoff or a day takeoff, and what flight doesn't have them? Nobody logs them, so I don't really sweat that too much. Night landings, by the way, also require night flight on the flight, and that's also important to remember. That's one of the very few rules that I enforce as an actual error. I don't let you log a night landing without night. And then people often ask about combinations, like I want my night PIC time, or my night dual time, or my night solo cross-country time. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a few slides, but the answer is don't. I can compute it much more accurately than you can, and you're just gonna make extra work for yourself or make things confusing if you try to log it yourself. So I don't even let you log these kinds of combinations. There are a couple of instrument things that you need to be careful of to make sure that you are properly logging. If you are logging simulated instrument and you're in an actual aircraft, you should be identifying a safety pilot, because if it's simulated instrument, you have your head, you're wearing foggles or a view limiting device, and that means you're not looking outside the window, and somebody should be looking outside the window. Number two on this is that if you perform approaches, you're supposed to log where and what kind of approaches you performed. The iOS and the Android apps have handy dandy little tools next to the approach count field that will generate concise little descriptions, like here where I say 2 ILS Yankee to runway 16 at Payne Field. There's absolutely nothing magical about that abbreviation. You can use, you could write it all out longhand if you want. You could put it in the remarks. I like to see it in the approach names field, but as long as you're logging it, that's the important thing. It is worth noting that if you want to track, oh, I did 4 ILS approaches, I did 2 Cat 2 approaches, I did 3 coupled approaches, 1 VOR approach, you can track those individually for purposes of totals, but those are just counts and they don't have the where you did that, and you're supposed to record that. Solo time, I get some interesting errors I see people do here. Student pilots log PIC and wonder why I didn't pick up their long cross country and ratings progress, because they had to have been solo, right? If they were PIC. No, being PIC doesn't make you solo. I even see people who confuse solo time with single pilot time. So where they have other people on board, but they're logging solo time. If there's another human being on board, you can't log solo time, so don't. And then this is sort of a catch-all and a bit of a hand wave because there's all sorts of stuff here. But be careful of subtleties in the regs. I'll give a couple of examples here, but there are lots of these. And of course, these are in the FAA regs. So for many ratings, the training is required by that rating is actually required for that specific rating. So if you get your private pilot and then start working on your commercial, some of the experience requirements from your PPL can count. Obviously, your total time, that goes back to time 0. Other requirements, where it says you have to have so many hours of training on the areas described in 61 whatever, that has to actually have been since your private pilot. It has to be for the commercial rating. But you gotta work your way through these regs, because, for example, you can, if you Google rolfing, you'll see an FAA interpretation that says, for example, that the 3 hours of simulated instrument that you do for your private pilot, actually you can count that towards your instruments, your 6165 40-hour requirement. So sometimes you can count it, sometimes you can't. Commercial rating has a few gotchas in this area specifically. The FAA made an exception to the solo requirement, or an alternative to the solo requirements, where you can do solo if you are performing the duties of pilot in command with an instructor on board. That's what I mean by DPIC/IOB. You can use that in place of solo time. And they did this because oftentimes it's very difficult to have access to or rent a fancy complex airplane or a twin. So you can't do your solo time in a twin often if you're not rated, just because you can't rent it. And so they let you do this thing where you have the pilot in command, the instructor on board with you, but you're acting as pilot in command. There are some subtleties here that can get you. One is that they're supposed to be sitting on their hands and keeping their mouths shut. If they're giving you instruction, it's not a substitute for solo, and you can't count it. You can look up the Kuhn interpretation for that. You also can't mix and match. If you want to do duties of PIC with an instructor on board, you have to do all of the required time in that manner. You can't do some solo and some with a pilot in command with instructor on board. Yeah, and that's the grandest interpretation. There are also some other interesting things in the regs. Nowhere that I'm aware do they define what it means to be training, or for that matter, what's a flight. So you have to weave your way around that a little bit. By the way, what I do, I count it as training time for ratings progress. I count it as training time if I see dual, and I count it as a flight if it's a single entry. That's the rule I use. I think actually the FAA has said that a flight is a common purpose. So it might have multiple segments, and if it's a common purpose, then it's a flight. But I think even that's a bit of a handle. And you'll notice what I didn't mention in those 10 errors, math errors. This is the bane of paper logbooks. My old paper logbooks are filled with scratched out entries. Now, I wouldn't be a good nerd if I didn't point out the small exception to this, and that is rounding errors. They can arise under some very narrow circumstances. If you log everything to 1/10 of an hour, you're fine. There's no rounding error. Everything will match up perfectly. If you do everything in hours and minutes format, they will line up perfectly as well, because I do all my math to the minute, meaning I round everything to the nearest minute, then do the math, all the addition. Where you can see some subtle, small rounding errors is if you do 2 decimal places and don't change your math rounding and still do per minute math. And that's because something like 0.18 or 0.23 doesn't divide evenly into a whole minute. For this reason, I do actually have a buried option that you can turn on, where I'll do all of the math to 36-second increments, which is 1/100th of an hour. And if you do that, no rounding errors, all is perfect. Okay, so I just did a whole bunch of different errors and such that you might see. And the good news is there's hope. There's a check flights feature that can be really handy dandy for finding these sorts of things. Do I need to make that a little bit bigger? I'm looking on a separate screen. Let me just zoom in a little bit, and hopefully that's easier to read. So I'm going to show you how check flights works. Check flights is on the website, and you can find it under logbook check flights. And you can see that there are 8 buckets of issues here. SIM issues, which I talked about, IFR issues, airport, route of flight issues, cross-country issues. You'll notice here that time accounting issues is unchecked, and that's because I detected that this browser is coming from the US, and so I assume you're working under FAA rules, and I'm not going to enforce this. This is the PIC plus SIC plus dual equals total math check. Which doesn't apply here. I can optionally restrict my check to just recent flights, and I can even keep track of when the last time I did a check flights was, and I can include flights that I've previously ignored. So here, for example, I can see I just hit check flights and went through my logbook, and it found 1,137 flights, 171 had issues, and here they are. And let me just get that out of the way here. So here, for example, I can see here's a flight where approaches were performed, but no approach names property was found. So it couldn't find that description of the approach. And in fact, I can see right here that I actually described it just in the remarks in the comments for the flight. So I actually met the requirement. It's just check flights couldn't find it. I could, if I wanted to, click on the flight here. And I could address that here and put it into the approach names field. But instead, what I might just do, hit cancel, come back here and say ignore, and now that won't come up next time. But the other nice thing about this is that you can do a check flights while you're adding flights. So for example, if I come in here, I've got a new flight, and let's just say I put in 2 hours There's down here in the lower right corner, there's a little magnifying glass. And if I click that where it says check for possible issues, you can see it says simulated instrument in a real aircraft is indicated, but no safety pilot. So this is what I mentioned before. You're supposed to have a safety pilot if you're doing that in an airplane. Notice it's also saying, hey, look, I've got 2 hours of simulated instrument time, and that's more than there is total time. So it's catching that, hey, maybe you have an error there. And in fact, it'll do some pretty sophisticated things. So for example, suppose I do, I fly from SeaTac Airport to London Heathrow, and I put 2 hours as the total time, and I say check flights. Notice here it says now route and total time imply a speed of 2,000 knots. Errant airport code. Flight indicates travel of more than 50 nautical miles, but no cross-country time was logged. Are you shorting yourself? So this is a great way. I've got about 200 different checks that I can do on flights. It'll find all sorts of likely math errors and other inconsistencies to make sure that your data looks good. So that is check flights. And I know I spent a lot of time on getting the data right, but I think that's the most important part of having a good looking logbook, is something that you can defend. All right, now let me talk about insurance reports, club reports, FBOs. This is actually why I started my flight book in the first place. Probably the most useful report here is under the training tab. There is a roll-up by time. And what this does is it breaks out all of your totals, and the left column here under all is all the totals that you see overall. And then it breaks out all of those totals by this month, the previous month, year to date, trailing 90 days, and so forth, because these are the kinds of questions that an insurance company or a club might want to know. But you might also really get in the weeds. Sometimes they want to know how many hours did you have for each of the last 3 years in high performance aircraft or something like that. And I think one of the most underappreciated feedback. So somebody says, did I mean to still be on the title slide? I think I'm seeing the analysis slide on my second computer. You still see check flights? Let me try and fix that. Well, I'm going to go back and do an analysis demo here. So it looks like others can see analysis. Interesting. Well, now I'm going to switch over and go to analysis. Can people see? I see dead people. Can people see the chart? Yeah, okay, good. So this is available on the website under analysis, or you can just click on the analysis button here. If you're familiar with pivot tables from Excel, then you'll be right at home. If you're not, don't worry, it's really simple. You pick a quantity that you want to graph, and you pick an x-axis that you want to graph things by, and it'll show you. So here I've got total time by year, and you can see each of the different bars is how much time I had per year. I can hover over it, and I can see how many hours I have. I can see its rank. I can see what percentage of total it is. This red line here is my running total. If I want to, I can see what my average is. So I can see here is the orange line. That's my average. And I can see the last 4 years, I haven't been flying as much as my average. But if I want to see how much night flight do I have by model, I can do that. And so here I can see that most of my night flying is in a Piper Archer, Piper was that Cherokee followed by an Archer. If I want to, I can even do kind of weird things like, day of week. I do most of my night flying on Tuesdays for whatever reason. If I go down here where it says click here to see the raw data, I can see all of the data that the chart is coming from, and all the stuff here in the left column here, or the left drop down here, is really just different columns of the data that's in the table here. And if I want, I can download that to a spreadsheet and do all sorts of number crunching and analysis on it there. So that's analysis, and that can help answer, I think, 99% of any of the questions that an insurance company or an FBO or a club might ask. All right. I should have switched to a screen that says custom currencies. If you can't see that, please say so in the tab. I have a second computer up that's just viewing. It's showing that. Everybody see custom currencies? So the other thing that you can do is you can create custom currencies that can demonstrate that you have the relevant recent experience for whatever the club or FBO wants to see. It's less of an insurance thing, I think, than it is a club or an FBO thing. They'll often want to see that you have, say, 3 hours in club aircraft within the preceding 90 days, or else they want you to go up with an instructor, or they don't want you to fly it at night unless you've had a night flight within the last year, or whatever it is. You can set up custom currencies on the website, and these will, of course, appear on the iOS or Android app, and you can show at a glance whether you have the requisite experience. If you use this in conjunction with flight coloring, which I'll talk about in a few slides, then you can really make it clear that you've got the experience that you need to have. All righty, let's talk about check rides. Probably the most important thing for a check ride is the 8710 report. This thing is a nightmare to do with paper. Computers to the rescue, they can do it quite easily. This will break it out. This is my 8710 report. It's broken out, you can see, by category, airplane, glider, rotorcraft, and by FTD and ATD on the left, and everything's all nicely broken out. But remember, a few minutes ago, I talked about those combination properties like solo cross country or night PIC that I said don't log it. Well, the beautiful thing about most of these things is that almost always you are cross country for the entire flight, or you're a PIC for the entire flight. One of the two quantities is an entire flight quantity. And as a result, that means that I can compute what your combination was. So your night cross country is just whichever is the smaller of those two values. If you flew for 2 hours and you logged 2 hours of cross country and you logged an hour of night, it was pretty clearly 1 hour of night cross country that will accrue to whatever ratings progress or to the 8710 form. And it saves you logging it, because I can figure it out. If you forget to log it, I can still figure it out. And if in that example you had logged a half hour of night cross country, clearly there's an error in your flight. So I often tell people, just don't log it. I'll figure it out for you and report it in the right places. The next thing you need for a check ride is you need to demonstrate that you have all of the requisite experience. And so under the training tab, I have ratings progress. That's where I am here. And this is also on the iOS and the Android app. So what you do is you can pick the rating you want. So private pilot, instrument, recreational. Here, let me pick private pilot. I've got like 95 ratings in the system. So here you can do private pilot, 61109A, airplane single engine, airplane multi-engine, helicopter, gyroplane, part 141, the European PPL licenses, Canadian, South African, Australian, and so forth. You pick the rating, and it'll populate here. And so for each of the requirements, it has a link to the regulation. As someone said, the option pop-up doesn't show up while I was reading the options. I think that might just be a Zoom lag. Anyhow, it shows you a little bar telling you how much it found. For requirements like finding a specific flight, it'll find, where you have to have a night time cross-country training flight. It'll find that flight for you and link to it. It'll also, in fact, show you the flights that were considered and rejected because perhaps they didn't meet the 50 nautical mile minimum. You might have logged cross country because it's a cross country flight, but it wasn't the requisite distance for this particular rating or for this particular requirement. In fact, this one uses 100 nautical miles. It'll even also, one of the interesting things here is that most of the FAA ratings require that you have 3 hours of training within 2 calendar months prior to the exam. And so this is geared towards, am I eligible to take the check ride today? And in this case, I'm not. I haven't had training in the past 2 months. So this one has faded over time for me. You also, if you want, you can set up your own custom ratings. So I have a sample one here. And what you do, suppose you have something you're working towards, or perhaps a club or an insurance requirement is saying, oh, you can't fly that retract aircraft until you have at least 150 hours in club aircraft or something like that. You can set up your own ratings progress and measure your progress and see how far you are away from meeting that goal. All right, let's come back here. Okay, it should say endorsements. I'm seeing it on my second screen, so I assume you can too. You also, when you go for check ride, you need to demonstrate that you have the required endorsements. I currently support both scans and I have templates for electronic endorsements with 96 templates plus custom templates. So you can do any kind of electronic template you want. The electronic endorsements can be signed digitally, and that means that the signer, the flight instructor or the DPE or whoever has signed in and authenticated themselves to the system. So there's no need for a fingernail scribble. Or they can do it I call it ad hoc, where they don't have an account or they don't have a relationship set up with you, where they can do a fingernail scribble. Or you can upload images, or you can upload PDFs. And in fact, I have uploaded not only my paper endorsements, but I uploaded scans of my medical and scans of my old paper logbook, just so I have a backup of it. And so I don't think that's a bad idea to do. And then probably one of the coolest things that you can do for a check ride or for an interview is flight coloring. And here you can save a search, give it a name, and assign it a color. This is really useful for highlighting significant flights, like, I don't know, check rides, or types of experience, such as your turbine time. Or, and this was a scenario I hadn't even thought about when I did this feature, you can do this in the reverse, where you're trying to highlight entries that don't meet your own personal standards. So there's a pilot who uses the system who wants to make sure that all of his professional flights in turbine aircraft are marked as Part 121 flights. And so he set up a search to color all flights in turbine aircraft that are not flagged as Part 121 with red, so that it pops out and he knows he needs to fix that entry. So let me cut over and show how to do flight coloring. I'm going to do a search here for my son. His name is Parker. And I'm going to just search for flights that I've taken with Parker. And so I'm going to click on saved searches. And the way you save a search is you just give it a name and then you say save and search. So I'm going to give it the name Parker. Thinking for a second. There we go. So this is now showing, see, it says matches search terms Parker up here. And these are now all flights that have Parker somewhere in there. Now what I can do is I can go Profile, Preferences, go into Flight Coloring, and you can see the search term that I've just added here, Parker. And if I click on where it says Sample, click to change. Let me give it an orange color. And so now, if I go back to my logbook, here you can see in the middle of my first page of flights, there's a flight I took with Parker. He was my safety pilot, and it's highlighted in orange. So it's just a simple way that you can highlight. You can see I also have some pink flights here. I have all my Angel flights in pink. Same basic principle. All righty. Job interviews. Here I'm going to get a little bit ahead of my skis because this is the one thing I have never actually flown professionally. So I'm basing most of this on experience talking with a lot of pilots who use my flight book who have successfully gotten jobs with the airlines or otherwise do professional flying. Probably the most useful tool here is the roll up by model, also under the training tab. And my understanding is that a lot of the airlines share the same way colleges use a common app for college applicants. They use a common application, or at least ask for common information. And this tries to follow that format. And so it breaks down all of your times based on the kind of aircraft. It shows your 6 and 12-month history for the things where it wants your 6 and 12 and 24-month history, shows you when your last flight was in that particular model of aircraft, and shows you all of your bottom line totals. All right, so that's the actual data for the application, but then you still need to share your logbook with the potential employer. 3 ways you can do this. You can kill trees. That's the traditional way. I guess that's okay. You can send a PDF. I think that's a little better. No trees have to die. But you can actually share a live copy of your data. And I'm going to just show that because I don't know that it's fully appreciated. So let me switch back over here. So if you go under Profile, Preferences, and expand Sharing, there's an option here that says Share your logbook in more details. And what you can do is you can create, you're basically creating a link that you can share. Anyone with the link can view read-only your logbook. So I'm going to say application link. And I'm just going to put my flights in it. So I'm going to say it doesn't show any of this other stuff. I'm going to say create link. All right, there it is. It's now first in the list. And you can actually see when somebody viewed it. This one has never been viewed. And you can see there's the actual link here. But if I just click on the little copy icon here, it'll copy to the clipboard. And so now I can open a new tab and paste that link in. And you'll see that I have an analysis and search, but I have a read-only view of Eric Berman's logbook. If I now come back and I say, oh, wait, they probably wanted to see my totals and my currency as well, I can come and I can say edit, totals, currency, update. And if I go back to that page and refresh, now I have a totals and a currency link that I can view. So I can control what information is displayed. And in fact, once I get the job, I can click on the little X here and say, I want to delete that link. I don't want it out there anymore. And now the link is gone. And if somebody tries to come back and view that page, they're going to get an unauthorized error. So you can see, oops, you aren't cleared to view that. So it's a great way to share. And that way, if the interview process takes a couple of weeks, they always have up-to-date information of your logbook. They can always see it's real-time data. But you still probably want to share a printed or at least a PDF version of the log. It is important to remember that electronic is not paper. This is an actual screenshot of my old paper logbook. You can actually see things that are crossed out because I put things on the wrong line and had to redo the math. But look, Paper was designed to solve a problem that is no longer really relevant. It had to be printed out before any data went in. You had to decide what information it was going to contain, and that's why you have separate helicopter logbooks and glider logbooks and military logbooks and fixed wing logbooks. It can't expand or contract based on the data. You can't customize it. It is kind of what it is. So and because it's pencil and paper, you have to make the math easier. So for example, here you can see there are 4 columns for category and class. So I can keep track of my category and class subtotals. And so I have one for single engine land, one for multi-engine land, and then 2 more. But you know, like I have a little bit of helicopter time, a little bit of glider time, and a little bit of seaplane time. So I already can't use this paper logbook because I don't have a column for those additional for that 5th category and class. It also wastes a ton of space with this per page subtotal, which exists for the exclusive reason of pencil and paper math. But a computer doesn't care about going back to the first page to figure out what your current total is. It'll do that all day long. But the reason this is here is so that I don't have to, so that when I'm on the 50th page of my paper logbook, I can just do the math for that 50th page and add it to the total from the page before it. But if you're not doing a paper, you don't need to do that. All right, so I support in my flight book 16 layouts. I advise people take a look at which ones best suit and highlight what you want to show. There are gobs of options about how you can customize this. There's a blog post I will link to in a few moments that you can customize. And instead of just walking through these bullet points, I'm actually going to just show what that looks like. So here I have gone to the print view. You go logbook print view, and you can see I've got my logbook here. And what I can do is I can pick what components of the logbook I want to show. So, for example, you can see here I've got the cover page. I can turn that off if I want. I have at the bottom here, I have totals and endorsements, and I can control whether I want to show them. For that matter, I could turn off the flights themselves if I wanted to. Probably the most interesting option is if I click on the layout tab here. Here are all those different layouts I described. I'm going to shrink this a little bit because you can't really see that things are going to change in real time. Let me go here. So, for example, I can pick a portrait layout. You can see that in real time it'll change. I can pick. There's a European FCL.050 layout. There's a US-ish layout. I can include signatures or not. I can decide whether or not to include flight coloring. By default, and my recommendation is it's all in continuous mode. That makes the most efficient use of paper. But if I want to, I can do things like, 4 flights per page or 5 flights per page, whatever granularity I want. Some layouts, but not all of them, let me add up to 4 columns. So if you want to have a column for that cross-country solo, you can do it. So I can click that. Now that's down here. And you can also clean it up by excluding data that you don't want to have. If you're applying for a job, how much oil you put in and how much it cost you for fuel is not really relevant. Once you get this all the way you want, the way that you like it, there's a little link up here. If you click on that, it will redirect you to a page link that you can save as a favorite. And then you can come right back to it directly with all of your options pre-selected. And there's a PDF download tab. You can pick a page size. You can pick a layout. I recommend landscape, pick margins. And then you can either just print the page and it'll get rid of all that cruft. It'll just, well, this is Chrome being slow. It'll just show you the logbook content. So all the tabs and stuff that I was just showing you on the top is automatically excluded. There we go. From the printout. or you can click to create a PDF download, and it will download with all of the options that you have set. At the bottom, it will have all of those totals all broken out by category and class. So you didn't need to put the category and class in different columns unless you really wanted to. If you want to have columns for retrack time, high performance time, you can add that. And of course, no addition errors. If you want to make it look really, really nice for a printed layout, the blog post I'm going to link to in a moment will tell you how to do that. There are binders you can buy. There are people who will print it out professionally and bind it for you. Some of these can be a little overpriced, but they can make your logbook look really nice, I suppose. And you can put in Post-it notes or use flight coloring to highlight the flights. One of the pilots who uses my flight book went through this and documented his experience doing this, and is the source for probably 90% of the blog posts that I'm going to link to. He got the job, by the way, but he's had people say that he's had interviewers remark on how much they've appreciated the postage or the flight coloring as a way to highlight check rides. But I think it's important to say, look, pilots have received job offers using electronic. They've received job offers using a PDF or using a simple alligator clip. I've never heard anybody being turned down due to the lack of binder. So my personal suggestion is do what makes you happy, that you feel really proud to put that forward. So with that, let me put this screen up here. Can everybody see the QR code? This is a link to the blog post that talks. It has a link, another link underneath it that goes into all the details about printing. But this also includes all of the tips for getting a nice printout, getting it bound nicely, and so forth. And so I will now answer 10 questions that I get asked. These are also in no particular order. How do I log tailwheel time or complex time? You don't. It's implicit in the aircraft. If you log an hour in a beach bonanza, it's an hour of high performance, it's an hour of complex. You don't need to tell me that. Already talked about this. How do I log solo cross country or night PIC? Again, let the computer do what computers are good at. Why is simulator time being counted in my totals? Because you logged total flight time for a simulator entry. Don't do that. Just put it in the ground sim field. How do I log ground training? This one actually is a good one to log. I didn't put this in the upfront data hygiene thing. Perhaps I should, but like a flight review, you're supposed to have an hour of ground training in addition to your flight time. There are properties for ground instruction received. It is well worth recording. How do I record a multi-engine check ride? You don't. There is no such thing. There are private pilot check rides and commercial check rides, and you get them. If you do it in a Seneca, then you get it with multi-engine privileges. But it's still a commercial check ride, or it's an additional rating check ride. I can figure out from the aircraft you used that it conferred multi-engine privileges if you didn't already have multi-engine privileges, but there's no need to record that explicitly either. Probably one of the most common questions I get asked is, why didn't ratings progress find my long cross country? Make sure that you're logging solo if it was supposed to be solo, or that you're not logging solo if you're doing duties of pilot and command with an instructor on board. Make sure that you meet the distance requirements. Make sure it's in a single flight entry, because otherwise I have no idea that these 3 entries you're counting as one flight. Otherwise, contact me. I can usually dive in. It can get a little bit esoteric, but read the regulation. Is often a lot of requirements. Oh, if it says training, if it says long training flight, I'm looking for dual in that case. Does the FAA accept electronic signatures? Yes. Advisory Circular 120.-78078 alpha describes the criteria you have to meet for the electronic signature to be valid. I believe my flight book adheres to that. The FAA accepts it. I have run into, fortunately, very few, but a few jerk, actually not DPEs, but like written test people who wouldn't accept electronic endorsements. Usually you just sort of go back and they relent. But the FAA is totally fine with it. And I've done a number of check rides with purely electronic signatures, and it's not a problem. A lot of people keep a paper logbook alongside their electronic logbook as a backup or for whatever reason, and sometimes they don't match. There are only two possible reasons for this. One is that there's a data discrepancy between the two where there's just some difference, and the other is you did the math wrong on the paper logbook. There's no math error on the electronic one, I promise you. Two ways I suggest people track down that discrepancy or math error. One is to use the print layout, ironically, and do 3, 4, 5 flights per page and see where you get the little subtotals and see where they start diverging. Or you can use the analysis with the running totals and see where things start to diverge. Why is the pagination in the print layout imperfect? I think there's actually a comment in the chat about this. I have a long blog post about that. It's because electronic is not paper, because I actually stretch things to fit. If you have a lot of data, I'll stretch, because if you have the data, I'm assuming you want it in there, and that can push things off to another page. So the flights per page is an approximation. And besides, for a PDF or a printout, I can't stress this enough. You don't need the per page subtotals. Just use continuous, and it'll make the most efficient possible use of paper, and you won't have any of these issues. Finally, I get questions about how to log amphibs. Amphibs, if you'll pardon the pun, are the odd duck of the flying world, because there is kind of no such thing. There's a category and class of single engine land or single engine sea. There are a couple of ways to handle this. The blog goes into more detail. You can override the category and class you want on a per flight basis, and that's generally what I would recommend that you do. And I am just at the 1 hour mark, but I'd like to answer at this point any questions, and I'd love any feedback for are there any changes, anything I should do differently, anything I should address in Oshkosh. So there's a question: are there plans to create an open source flight bag like ForeFlight or Plan Go? I wish there were. I actually use ForeFlight in flight. I think it's a great product, but it's expensive and it's not open source. It'd be nice to have something that is free. I think that's well beyond the scope of what I can do without a larger team. And I'm not sure I have any particular expertise to bring to it, but I'd love if somebody did. Other questions or comments? Feel free to unmute yourself, by the way.
Eric, it's Malcolm. I put a question in the chat. It might be at the top of the chat about the icon you used for the check this flight's data, which is brilliant.
Yeah, no, that's actually a good point. I should probably redo that one. I do not have an artistic bone in my body, so sometimes I don't do the best icons. But that's an easy fix, and I think you're right.
Some feedback about the presentation is that there was a point at which it got down into some pretty serious weeds about, I can't remember what it was now, but it was right around the 18-minute mark, which is when I joined the call. And it went into, I think it might, it was about some very sort of edge case requirements for ratings and various interpretation letters that say that you can or can't mix and match.
Yeah.
What was it? Acting as pilot in command with an instructor on board. And I think that one of the bullet points on that page is supposed to have a not or a can't in it, which is missing. Specifically, the interpretation letter with some person's name on it that says that you may not mix and match. That doesn't, the slide doesn't say that. But my suggestion would be to either remove that slide or show it and say there's a bunch of really weird edge case stuff which can be addressed, but I'm not going to go into that now because the number of people that's going to be useful information or going to help convince them to use the logbook is going to be zero or very close to it.
I think you're right. I think I actually may replace that one with the ground training thing, because that'll affect more people. You want to be able to demonstrate that you got that ground training. But I take your point. It definitely does get into the weeds and is pretty narrow.
Yeah, and the when you get into letters of interpretation from the FAA, you're going to get a serious MEGO reaction, I think, from the vast majority of people, even at Oshkosh.
MEGO?
My eyes glaze over.
Oh. Yeah, that's why I wanted to do a pre-flight. Thank you. Someone here asked, do you suggest a good way for military pilots to track PIC versus SIC based on their certification to aircraft commander date? I've been taking my primary and secondary time and then filtering based on PIC certificate date. Anything prior to the certificate date is SIC, and then afterwards I applied a factor. Oh boy, I got to think about how to answer that. I certainly do have you can do your second pilot and aircraft commander times. I do have ways you can log those up, primary and secondary time. You can log those explicitly. We should take that offline. If you want to send me an email, so I understand the scenario a little bit better, not being a military pilot myself, I can either tell you how best to do it or implement a new feature to address it. Alrighty, well, I will.
One thing that might be worth mentioning is the autofill, which is amazing. If you mentioned it in the first 18 minutes, then great, and I missed it. But if you didn't, it might be something worth highlighting because it is kind of life changing.
Which autofill are you talking about?
The one where I fill in after a flight has been made, as opposed to
autofill. Yeah.
Well, it might be worth talking about the fact that you can hit starting engine now on your phone and stopping engine now on your phone, and magically everything, not only will your flight path be logged, but all of your appropriate times, even including night, will be automatically logged for you. But then that there's a separate thing where if you didn't have your phone along or you were worried about depleting its battery, that you simply enter the start time and engine start time and engine stop time of yesterday's flight. And then if you can find the autofill command, which I am usually able to do, but when I went to try and do it today, just before the call, it wasn't there. Then it will calculate all of your times, including how much of your flight was at night, using its amazing knowledge of where you were and when the sun rises and sets.
Yeah, so here, I can actually quickly show I can think of 3 different places where there are different forms of autofill. Here, let me do, I'm going to do this at 2105 to 2305. I'm just going to pick a couple of airports up here. So let's say I go for a night flight here. I just have a start and an end time, and I say autofill with this route. It should fill in yeah, 2 hours of total time and 1.4 hours of night flight, based on creating a synthetic Great Circle route. There are a couple of other bits of autofill that happen here. One is if I start typing in a safety pilot or a name of pilot in command, it'll autocomplete to previously used values for things like that. And then here's way down in the weeds. If I'm doing training, if I type a square bracket and then start typing a regulation, it'll even fill in the regulation for things that you're supposed to be covering as a topic. So there are all sorts of little hidden autofill things that you can put in. And of course, there's the cross fill where I can fill in by clicking the little gray arrow.
So if that ability to calculate how much of your flight was at night for you, and whether your flight was cross country or not for you, is not in the presentation, I would suggest putting a slide in, one slide for each of those two, because they're so cool.
Okay, noted.
And then maybe one more slide about, oh, if you log the flight after the fact, fill in the start time, fill in the end time, and then click autofill and poof, watch it calculate. You don't even have to subtract the hours and minutes the way you used to.
Yeah. You can also do things like, you notice how it filled in PIC here. That's because for this aircraft, 39er Juliet, I have here auto cross-fill PIC time. And so when you do autofill on it, it'll fill that in for you. Well, great. I appreciate the feedback, because I think I can tighten the talk up and cover a few more interesting things before Wisconsin next month.
Do you have a date and time of the presentation? I'll be there, and I want to make sure to make it.
Not yet. I usually get that like at the end of June. They're really slow about doing that. So I hope it overlaps with when I'm there, actually. But just keep an eye. I'll publicize it on the My Flight Book Facebook page. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I really appreciate it. I don't want to keep you much longer, so I'm going to call it there. I'll post the recording of today up on the My Flight Book YouTube page. And hopefully I'll see you guys in Oshkosh. So thanks for coming.
Thank you.